Welcome to everyone listening. This is Shades of Life, another Shades of Life conversation that is typically recordings of questions that we hold together amongst Kathy Jourdain, Jerry Nagel, myself, Janet Trump. Today it's the three of us, Jerry, and myself. And we're exploring some life issues that sometimes show up with phases of life, shades of life, some of that naming in there. But we usually start somewhere and then follow it. Today's start, unbeknownst to Kathy and I, is Jerry. So we're going to kick it off blind and have some fun. Welcome, everyone.
Great. Thanks, Tenneson. Good to see everyone here today that will join us in the recordings later on. Um, for many of us, we have been in a time of awareness and celebration around the 250th anniversary of the United States. So we've approached that in a variety of different ways, but one of the things that I feel has sort of been missing from the conversations or the reflections is how radical the notion of the American Revolution sought in that we are all equal.
Mhm.
That prior to the revolution, if you were a university student, you were required to bow to classmen above you, class people, men at that point in time. If you were of the working class, you were required to doff your hat to someone of higher status than you. Where you sat in church was
Mhm.
determined by age and economic status. And post-revolution, things like shaking hands emerged. People were on equal footing in many ways. We could choose where we sat in church. We didn't have bowing was eliminated. The concept of reality was extremely radical.
Mhm.
And I feel like we forget that, just how world changing, earth shifting the American Revolution was. And then a few years later came the French Revolution. And I wish that we would pay more attention in the present to the notion of equality amongst all of us. And um, I, I just been reflecting on that a bit lately about just how much we might be at risk of losing the power of what that the American Revolution meant and what we really should be celebrating now or honoring now at this point in time, that how powerful and earth-changing that was. Um, yeah, that's kind of where, it's been on my mind this morning in particular as I was thinking about approaching this call.
Mhm.
And just I did a little reading on about the Revolution, American Revolution, over lunchtime. And so I just, what does that mean to us, to any of us, the concept, the notion of equality amongst people.
Mhm.
Just a couple other things. I think the affirmation of the 14th Amendment is also an affirmation of equality. The birthright citizenship is really an important thing. And then I don't really talk about this much, but my ancestors came over on the Mayflower. And so if you think about heritage as status,
Mhm.
that I would have status in a way that some others wouldn't. But it, I don't believe in that notion. I mean, I have an ancestor that was the second governor of Pennsylvania.
Mhm.
Um, but that doesn't give me any form of status. I am no more equal. I am no less equal, more equal, whatever the right phrase is of saying that. Then we are here, the three of us, or others that are our friends and family and colleagues.
Mhm.
Um, and I just think it's important to remember that,
Mhm.
notion. So that was my reflection in the moment of the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution and the radicalness of it that we can lose sight of.
Hmm. Thank you. Kathy, you want to run? Want to go north of the border?
No, I want you to go
You want me
next.
to run for a little bit? I will try. Um, with listening to you, Jerry, there's many things that stir for me around this 250 number and so forth. And um, some of it is very tangled material for me. And then I have another chapter to add to that, though. So um, yeah, so I'm going to play for a minute. Some of us want to be patriotic, and I don't know what patriotism means anymore, or it feels like it's so charged in a few directions that my simple patriotism isn't enough. That's true in some way, and that's confusing, and that's disappointing, and that's a bit maddening too. There's at least a form of weaponization that's happened around politics, of either being in or out, and perhaps not encompassing as much of a neutral space. What I like in what you're naming, Jerry, is that at the heart of the Declaration of Independence and writing of the Constitution, that there were some really profound and important ideas that were being expressed. Another part of this for me, especially with the number of the 250, like, I'm a person that would get excited about that. As a younger person, I'd be all over it. It also feels like there's some difficult exclusion that's in there. There is a First Nations history in this country that
Mhm.
well precedes the 250-year mark. So that sort of sits with a bit of challenge in me. Uh, like there's just there's a broader context of anniversary and all of that. However, there is such a thing as the forming of a date and forming of a country and the departing from, which includes, so much of the European influence and the English. So there's all of that that's in play. I kind of like the equality naming that you just did, Jerry, of, it used to be that you had to tip the hat, and it used to be that you didn't shake hands, an equality that way, or even a covenant to that equality. Um, the added piece that I'll put in here is that 2 weeks ago, I put in my application for US citizenship.
Wow.
And it can be dual, by the way, Kathy, I think, as you know. So I'm anticipating retaining my Canadian citizenship and also having US citizenship. So that's in the records, and I've already been called for my biometric appointment in a couple of weeks. But the total process will probably take 10 months or so to happen. Now, I've lived in the United States since 1986, originally as a student. I had a little bit of a working time, and then through marriage and relationship was able to get green cards and stuff like that. But I've never looked for citizenship. The thing that I'm finding interesting is some of what, Jerry, you have named, and I'm finding it more compelling in some way. Because I've gone into ChatGPT and got the guidance from ChatGPT on how to fill out the application and all of that stuff that made it easier. And then for me to say, now what's that test I'm going to need to pass? And so it's giving me the materials, there's 100 questions and apparently you're only asked 10 and you just got to get six of them right. It is the initial formation, like what is the ruling law of the United States, the Constitution? And the naming of, like the language all of a sudden stood out to me, feeling like, holy moly, man, this is cool language. We, the people of these United States, in order to form a more perfect union, something like that, and then naming some other things, like even the language of a more perfect union, a something in progress. When I think of some other political figures, presidential figures, Obama's voice comes into me, speaking about the intentions of forming the Constitution and laws of the land that way, and how imperfect a democracy is. I gotta say, I was surprised by how excited I felt for that language of intention. Uh, it was and remains moving to me. I'll stop there. Now we go north.
I think it's just east.
You're probably right.
I didn't know that it never occurred to me that you weren't already a US
Yeah,
citizen,
yeah.
Tenneson. So
I,
interesting.
I travel on my Canadian passport.
Hmm. Um, I also didn't know or ever think about, because I wasn't alive back then, about the deference of the different classes and things like that. I never really gave that much thought. So that's kind of interesting. I do, not really sure where to go with all of this. I agree about very tangled. I like the notion of radical. Um, at the beginning, radical now looks very different than it did 250 years ago, perhaps. I like the idea of a more perfect union, the language of intention, like all of those things really speak to me. And it just makes me a little bit curious about what it means to be radical and what it might mean for any one of us to feel like we're being radical. Um, but just where my mind goes is back to the astrology when you start asking questions like this. And so when you talk about the date, and I get like there were people in North America long before anyone from Europe or wherever happened to come across the land here. But in the astrological charts,
Mm,
when they're looking at countries or places, they use, like for the US, they use like the minute, day, or minute, hour, day, year of the founding, whatever happened, um, as the birth date for the US.
mm,
And right now, in this year, the placement of planets and whatever in the skies is the exact same as it was when the US was founded. And so when you talk about the
huh,
revolutionary energy and the radical energy of things, what's happening now is a reflection of those same characteristics that brought about the revolution and the founding of the US. So what it looks like now is obviously within the context of what's happening in this time. But when you think about something was breaking down and something was being born,
mm,
the relationship between the US and Britain was breaking down, and the US was being born at that point.
mm,
Now, oh, I was going to say, now it's like the relation, something is breaking down in the US and being born in the US, but also
mm,
internationally, things are breaking down and new things are being born.
mm,
So there is a radicalness to this time, just as there was a radicalness to that time,
mm.
just within the context of this time. And there's a whole stream of people who I follow who are basically saying there's a new earth being born, even as we're living in this physical world that we're living in. And there's a whole slew of people who talk about it, who write about it, talk about the energies of this time and what possibly could be coming next. And it will be radical. If it happens in the way that people are describing it, it will be radical compared to how we think about things and live things right now.
Kathy, astrologically, the same in 1776 and now.
Yeah.
In between, has it ever been the same that you're
Yeah.
aware of?
Yeah, there are people, and can't give you specific examples, but there are people who track the skies and what's happening in the skies and will go back in
Mm,
this time or that time. This is what was happening during that time. This placement of Neptune or Pluto or
yeah.
whatever, or the placement of certain pattern or certain planets together. So there are very clear, definitive patterns that show up with different placements of different planets and stars and the sun and moon and
Mm,
all of that.
mm. Okay, cool. I'm curious where you're going to pick it up now, Jerry.
Mhm.
Stir the pot.
I'm going to make a modest attempt to riff a little bit on the patriotism piece.
Mm,
Patriotism, yeah.
Um, because I think when the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution were written, it was equality for white men.
Mm,
And we should remember that. But over time, the radical notion of equality evolved. So it
mm,
included at post-Civil War, you know, the black population of the United States in the early 1900s, the suffragette movement, and women, and in the 1960s and 1970s, post Stonewall, the gay movement, and then Obergefell and same-sex marriage. And so there has historically been this underlying ideal, this
mm,
underlying notion of equality that we've in the here and other countries at different times, sometimes before us, sometimes after us, have fought for too, and people have fought hard and died for. And so patriotism to me isn't about soil. Patriotism to me is about the ideal of who we are.
mm,
And so the ideals of what we want to be as Americans is what I can be patriotic about.
mm,
And so this notion of sort of blood and soil, and that's why birthright citizenship was such a big issue, and so on, is I've always struggled with that notion, that soil defines you. Um, and that's a complex issue but it's one I've struggled with. But the ideals
mm,
I have felt solid and strong for me of all people, all men are created equal with the right to life of pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness, and so on. Those ideals define to me who we are and are the foundation of my patriotism to
mm,
the United States, to America. Um, and I hope we never lose that underlying ideal and the fight for it or to hold it, even though right now there are forces strongly working against that ideal. I don't believe they'll win. I believe 250 years is just too strong a foundation. In my heart, I have to believe it's too strong a foundation for us
mm.
to lose. So there we go.
Yeah, well, like you, Jerry, are talking to two Canadians here. So let's keep that in mind. And I pull that back in. Like I'm actually speaking some of my astonishment as a person who appreciates values. And we all tend to work by invoking some values and then nuancing them and creating some relationship to them. Yay. I dig the values that live behind something. If I try to measure or observe what's going on in the day to day, holy shit, feels like a mess. But when I peek at the values behind, I think this is part of my surprise. Like, whoa, wait a minute. That's really cool stuff. I was just pulling it up on my phone again here. We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, ensure whatever, support, provide for the common defense, promote general welfare, secure blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. That's impressive language. And I can get behind that so easily. Now, this is fresh on me before we pressed record today. We were talking about trips and travel, and I just came back from British Columbia and a little summertime, a week with family and my parents, my daughter, sister, nieces, nephews, their partners, my sweetheart. I come back from a trip like that. It's just known for me that when I go back to Canada, and I know that geography quite well, I come from the West and, have spent more of my time in Alberta and BC and Saskatchewan. Something fills my tank,
Mm,
something geographically oriented, or maybe energetically geographically oriented. I just feel topped up, and it's a satisfying kind of feeling. So that's one thing. Um, and then the connection I was going to make also is one of my concerns and I think important reflections right now in applying for US citizenship is what does it mean in relationship to my Canadian citizenship?
mhm,
And it's known that you don't have to choose one or the other, but that's still, I don't have to surrender citizenship in order to get US citizenship. And yet that still feels really important to pay attention to because, it's less of a which is better, which I don't want to be in that conversation at all. But when it comes to swearing an oath to value these values,
mhm,
that's good stuff right there.
mhm,
So that's part of my real time uh, intentional reflectiveness around what does it mean to swear an oath to these United States of America, the Constitution, in relation to my, 25-year upbringing in Canada. I find that's moving my heart because I think I was afraid of that.
mhm,
I don't want to do this US thing because it's going to make me say no to Canada. I'm not saying
mhm,
no to Canada, but I can also say yes to these kind of values and the attempt to apply them.
mhm.
I'll stop.
Yeah, that certainly goes back to it doesn't have to be either or.
Yeah.
It can be both. And I like what you pointed out around the commitment to the values. And, going back to um, comments that Jerry was making about patriotism and that underlying ideal of equality. And, the moment it's being fairly challenged. We also mentioned about ideals that people have fought for and died for.
Mm,
And I think sometimes we believe, it is 2026 after all, people
mhm,
might say. And so there's a little bit of, I'm going to say arrogance around we're so much more sophisticated than
mm,
in the French Revolution or the American Revolution or the whatever. Um, because we live in an age that's maybe a little bit more technologically advanced and our houses are different and our work is different and things like that. And maybe that's where we run into a little bit of cognitive dissonance as well when we look at the human dynamics that are playing themselves out in countries and cities in the world and communities. There's an element of forgetting that
mm,
it's human nature that is actually fueling all of this.
mm,
And I think we live in a time where we believe in North America that we
mm,
don't have to die for our values, and yet it's happening.
mm,
Um, and it's happening in other countries as well. So we've had the privilege
mhm,
of being separated by an ocean from a lot of the strife, or in Central or South America, there'd be more conflict that we've seen there as well. So I think for myself, there's the sense of being,
Mhm.
what is the word? Just this sense of,
Mhm.
okay, oh shoot, I can't find the right word. Um, Lulled into this sense of everything is fine and
Mhm.
what the heck is going on out there anyway?
Mhm.
So, I know for myself over the last must be a decade now, I've been surprised by the movements and where they're going and the pushback and the whatever, because it's only in the last decade that it dawned on me
Mhm.
it's not it's not ever done.
Mhm.
And in one way, you can't ever relax around the protection of the ideals because someone's going to come in, try to pull the rug out from underneath you.
Mhm. Yeah.
You hit on. I I want to head in a different, slightly different direction for the moment, but I want to follow up on what Kathy just said because I mean, to me, it's really quite important is that we don't become complacent in what we have, and that the destruction of history
Mhm.
is a way for us to
Mm.
forget what we have. And I feel like there's a large movement right now to change, to rewrite history in a way then, at least in the US, to rewrite history in a way then that removes the memory of the importance of what we have, the equality and other rights and
Yeah.
the struggle for them. But also when I think about equality,
Mhm.
I, I want for me, it's not just about humans.
Mhm.
That
Right.
that equality is a bigger concept. Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, the joy right now of the fireflies that are in the backyard.
Mhm.
If I put lots of chemical on my yard to have the most perfect grass and no weeds and everything, I wouldn't have fireflies.
Mhm.
But that could be a statement that I'm above nature or I'm controlling nature or constructing in a way that I want to serve whatever my image of it is, the
Mhm.
perfect suburban lawn or whatever. And so the equality is about living beings to me, living creatures and the right to live and survive and be part. And so there's a lot of stuff going on right now in the US that around destruction of wildlife, wild places, uh,
Mhm.
and that worry me a lot because it's a statement that humans are somehow above it, that we aren't equal in this place on this planet. And um so it's a bit of what does equality mean, and the definition to me is more than just human equality amongst each other.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
just lay that out there.
Yeah, I just appreciate it too, Jerry. I don't know where it all goes, but I personally relate to a broader sense of belonging and harmony and equality that you're naming. There are people who have given their lives to movements to support such notions, and and I'm glad for that. There's part of this picture that feels too big for my brain. So I end up coming back to some simple things like the values, and maybe it's the part that I'm content to stop on for today is there was a context in human history where in Europe and in relationship to North America, that control was more the paradigm.
Mhm.
And it seems to me that the foundation of the US in part was a reaction to that control, uh, which included taxation and some of that. So instead of an environment in which that control and that hierarchy was constantly in play and enforced, it's a shift to something that feels a little more synchronous or a little more harmonious, which is easy to bring forests and wildlife into. Excuse me. I like it that there are values that point in that direction. Again, Obama, I seem to hear his voice a fair amount, naming democracy is a messy thing. We're going to get mad at each other and we're going to, we're going to fight and that, but there's still some like generic holding of the concept and the institution. I'm so glad for that. Um, and maybe trying to loop back a little bit to where you started us off, Jerry, naming 250 birthday and some of the founding energies and context that went into the United States becoming the United States. There's potent words in there. And I'm really glad to have some of that. I don't think I can ever be a sort of blind patriot.
Mm.
And there's plenty of that happens. But when I go back into intentions, that's got power to me. And I'm really glad to feel those things in any messy democracy also. So I suppose there's a bit of me that's allowing myself to celebrate a little bit and play with these words because hey, guess what? I just applied online and I said I'm going to give this more of my heart.
Mm.
I'll stop there. I appreciate the topic, Jerry.
We were just back from a trip to France, 10 days or so, and I have personal practices like meditation and yoga, and I really didn't do any of that.
Yeah.
Except one day on the beach at St. Malo when I went down with Zoe for the last her last run at looking for shells, and I
Fun.
just sat on the beach and just sat, which was cool. But I have a lot of that practice here in my house. I have a regular meditation practice. I meditate almost every day, and I do yoga on a fairly regular basis here in my house.
Mm,
And when I found my house 16 years ago, it was like this house was calling out to me. It
mm,
was clear it was supposed to be my house. And I really noticed on that first night when I was back, and my cat wasn't here yet, uh,
mm,
I could feel the energy in this house. And I could feel the energy in me that I wasn't as tuned into when we were away.
mm,
And it a to me it's this symbolic of this bigger thing that we're talking about, this bigger movement, this sense of a more holistic worldview about the world,
mm,
that we live in. And when I think about
mm,
what the future holds, if you read anything about tipping points at all, they'll say like it's not a 50% thing that tips you over or more than that. You only need 20-25% of people moving in that direction to hit the tipping point. I believe that there are those people, like those numbers are
mm,
are increasing, and
mm,
more and more people are waking up to the reality of the world that they're living in and going, whoa, wait. Um,
mm,
so just thinking personally, the energy that I feel and who I know is out there doing this kind of thing in the world, I feel like the next radical shift may be way better than
mm,
any of us can anticipate if you
mm,
just look at what's showing up in our news feeds.
mm.
So wonderful conversation today. Um, uh, to all of our friends and colleagues out there that watch the Shades of Life videos, um, I would invite you the next time you're with friends or family and having a little beverage and a casual conversation to maybe just talk a little bit about what ideals are important to you.
Mm.
This was a wonderful conversation that wasn't political. It was about the underlying values of each of our countries and the lives we want to live. And so in this 250th anniversary of the US, have a conversation about
Mm.
what matters to you here in ideals, in values, and what does equality mean to you? If I can be so bold, I say it's an invitation from all three of us to
Mhm.
join in that conversation over the summer and fall.
Cool.
So.
I'm just going to say I don't think that's a casual conversation. Kind of takes you into the realm of something a little more intentional. I'll just say that. I want to thank you guys for adhering to the dress code today since we all showed up dressed in blue.
Excellent.
Couldn't help but notice at some point along the way.
That's fun.
And as always, appreciate these conversations and like you never really know where they're going to go. So
Me
there we
too.
go.
Until next.
Yeah.
Until next. Yes.